Topo and I were trying to climb a new route on Everest, and we attempted it in 2019. Then COVID happened. Everest season got canceled. And so then we were like, well, in 2021, Everest season gets canceled again. We had been training really hard, and we're like, let's go to Dhaulagiri and try to do something on the Northwest Ridge, the Northwest Face. And so we're making a film about my parents and my family and my dad dying of cancer at this point. We've invested a lot of money. Topo and I have been training for years. You know, we're at base camp. We fly in. And all of a sudden, I'm like kind of off my rocker.
Hello and welcome to the Duffel Shuffle. I'm Adrian Ballinger, and we're here to discuss the world of climbing and skiing in all its forms through the eyes of mountain guides.
And I'm Sam Kiekefer. In each episode, we'll unpack exhilarating stories, share invaluable insights, and get up close and personal with some of the most experienced and passionate guides and athletes in the industry.
Whether you're a seasoned alpinist or a weekend warrior, the Duffel Shuffle is your ticket to the thrilling world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. Join us.
All right, Adrian, episode 8 of the Duffel Shuffle. How are you?
It's episode 8. I didn't know what number it was going to be. I'm so glad you started off today. I'm great. I'm in Rocklands in South Africa still, but at the very tail end of what has been perhaps the wettest, rainiest month of my life.
Lots of rain. Have you had any sends on the boulders?
Yes. I mean, it's easy to talk about the rain and the struggle and the fact that I'm not sure I actually like bouldering very much, but it's been an incredible month. And Emily actually sent her hardest boulder problem of her life the first time she climbed a double-digit boulder. She's also not like a bouldering specialist. She climbed V10. She did it really early in the trip in a little small period between, like, I think it rained 8 days straight, no climbing for 8 days, like stranded in our tent because we couldn't cross the river that we were behind, to a day and a half of no rain to a bunch more rain. And she sent in that day and a half. And then today I actually, I think I sent my hardest bouldering grade outside. That might mostly be because I've never bouldered before, but it actually has been like a wild process where, like, I've been pretty frustrated, not getting much climbing in because of the rain, really feeling like I was underperforming, and then trying to learn a bunch from a lot of the great climbers around me and go through the process and find a boulder that I was totally inspired by. And today I sent it. So it's a good day.
Awesome. Love to hear it.
After we wrap up this podcast, I'm going to drink some wine, and they do a lot of barbecuing here. I'm going to eat some weird meats off the barbecue and call it a good trip.
Sounds great.
How about you, Sam? Are you in Tahoe? How are things there?
In Tahoe, enjoying one of the warmer summers we've had in a while. And warmer summer with an 11-month-old. So I haven't been doing tons of adventuring, but I'm kind of gearing up. I'll be guiding in Ecuador in 2 weeks. So trying to get that last minute fitness in and make sure I'm prepped and ready for a trip up Cayambe in Ecuador.
Well, obviously Ecuador is, you're guiding with Alpenglow Expeditions. I hope. He's nodding. That's a good thing. Is it a ski expedition to Cayambe or a pure climbing expedition?
Pure climbing, just the Ecuador climbing school that I've done before. And looking forward to walking up and down in Ecuador.
Fantastic. Oh, I'm jealous. Obviously, Ecuador is kind of the foundation of our program at Alpenglow, and we have so many great friends there. And sounds like a nice break from the just pure summer of Tahoe, where I assume it doesn't rain and the sky's always blue.
It's been hot. The lake's nice and warm. It's been tough to go running because it's warm outside and all you want to do is spend the day at the beach. But
wow,
looking forward to
exactly what I'm looking forward to. But I can also understand why it's time for a break from that.
Yeah, exactly.
I also feel like it sounds like we're going to do another segment of the news on climate change based on that description of Tahoe, but we're not. What news do we have this week?
Yeah, it's been pretty quiet in the past few weeks. You know, what I wanted to bring up with you, since you have so much experience in the Karakoram and the Himalaya, is, the summer climbing season of 8,000 meter peaks has been kind of a slow start. There's been a lot of weather and challenges on routes. Finally, it seems like, there's been a bunch of summits of Broad Peak. There were some summits of K2 recently. There's also been some tragic fatalities and missing climbers, most notably 2 Japanese climbers were spotted lifeless on the west face of K2 when they were trying to open an alpine style route. What, in your experience, what is kind of the main difference between the climbing that's done in the Himalaya and the climbing that's done in the Karakoram?
There are, of course, the peaks are about the same size, but the Karakoram and the main Himalayan range in Nepal and Tibet really do feel very different. I think the two biggest differences that I noticed are, one, the tourist infrastructure is so much less established in Pakistan. That's one of the beauties of the place, but it's also one of the challenges of the place. So, things like hygiene are much more difficult. Getting all the equipment you bring to Pakistan, actually getting it all to the mountain can be quite challenging. It can be hard, while the people there are just incredible. It can be hard to have really reliable staffing for things like base camp and portering and the jobs that form the backbone of an expedition. It can be hard to have consistency with those staff members. So there's a challenge in the infrastructure. The second big challenge is just there seems to be just much less reliability of weather forecasting. And I don't think that's bad weather forecasting, because we're using the same forecasters from Switzerland that we use in the Nepal and Tibet Himalaya. But the weather is just not as predictable. And the cycles seem more like muddled. The summit window periods aren't nearly as similar year to year to year. And so I think what we saw this year is very much descriptive of how climbing in Pakistan is, which there were, so many talented climbers on all the 8,000 meter peaks there, so many talented skiers, expedition leaders that go there year after year after year. And yet, essentially, there's been almost no success, and many teams went home after waiting for 6, 7, 8 weeks for safe conditions for the projects they had. The climbers who have stayed on the commercial routes, for instance, Broad Peak, like you mentioned, and K2, now finally they're getting a window to climb in. I haven't heard how actually truly good or safe the window is, but I think there were dozens of summits today on K2 and probably also on Broad Peak, and we'll wait to hear from Gasherbrum 1 and Gasherbrum 2. But I think it took a lot of patience to finally get this window. And certainly what that meant is many of the very cutting edge style projects, like Benjamin DeVreen trying to climb base camp to summit on K2 and paraglide from the summit all in a single push. It sounds like he's kind of downgraded his goals. David Gottler, who was over on Nanga Parbat, ultimately went home with no summit of the I think the Rupal face on Nanga. And brutally, tragically, it sounds like Haredi and Nakajima, the 2 Japanese climbers who were attempting an alpine style climb of the West Face, it sounds like they've taken a fall, and more details to come. But, for Japan this year, their alpinists and kind of high mountain climbers, it's just been a brutal year. And these were 2 of the real great talents, kind of young, great talents of Japan. So of course, I hope there's good news, but I think it all kind of fits into how challenging Pakistan is for the things that are outside of your control. Of course, it's easy to go into an expedition fit and ready and to have chosen a good operator and things like that. But Pakistan still has a load of uncertainty. And I think that's part of the challenge of the place. Hopefully, if you're going in with, I guess, what I was going to call the right mindset, it's also part of the beauty of the place. It's fucking hard, and the outcome is truly unknown when you go to the Karakoram.
It sounds just raw and hard to manage. Certainly the weather is out of our control, but the infrastructure aspect of it is a unique characteristic of the range for sure. So thanks for
absolutely.
that
And then I
insight.
guess one other thing I'd say is just like, if there's another thing about the Karakoram, it's how darn steep it is, right? Like it's there. We are not talking about volcano mountains like you're going to lead an introductory trip to a volcano in Ecuador, and nothing's ever steeper than 40 degrees, and it's kind of progressive. These mountains, the vertical relief in very short distances is just remarkable. It's like, taking the granite spires of Chamonix and growing them to 28,000 feet. It's If you're
Wow.
a climber or a skier or a paraglider or someone who just loves mountain landscapes and hiking in them, it is a place to see.
A little bigger than where you are in Rockland, South Africa.
Yeah, I'm busy climbing 3-meter climbs, 10-foot climbs. No, actually, I think one of the things Rocklands is known for is how high a lot of their boulders are. It's kind of famous for that. And that's been part of my process, is getting comfortable with that. Like I would overall say I have a great head when I need to in the mountains with exposure. And, when I choose to take risk, I think I'm quite capable of it. The risk here has been difficult. Like I don't think many people are dying bouldering. I'm going to knock on wood with that. But like, it is really easy to get hurt. It's kind of like how I think of mountain biking. And it's been
Yeah.
a process to kind of trust the system here, which is, partners, a lot of times people you don't know spotting you. And then like, I mean, it's hilarious. There will be boulders with like 20 bouldering pads under them, essentially like mattresses just stacked up. But then people can be doing really, really technical moves at their limit, 15, 20, 30 feet off the ground without a rope. It's a whole different mindset. It's wild.
Well, sounds like you guys had a good trip. Looking forward to connecting back here in Tahoe, and safe travels home.
Sounds great. The next episode of the Duffel Shuffle will be together.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. And coming up, we have an episode with Cory Richards. Today's podcast is brought to you by Alpenglow Expeditions, a Tahoe-based guide company with an international reputation. In its 20th year of operations, Alpenglow leads the highest quality expeditions in some of the world's greatest mountain ranges, from California's High Sierra to the rugged Himalaya. Alpenglow runs more than 40 international expeditions per year, as well as offering a full menu of guided ski and climbing courses throughout California. Join us and experience the Alpenglow difference. Well, welcome back to the Duffel Shuffle podcast, everyone. I'm just so excited for this podcast to have Cory Richards with us. Welcome, Cory.
Thanks, man. It's so fun to be talking to you, of all people, on a podcast. Who would have thought? Well, I guess we probably could have thought, but yeah.
Who would have thought? We don't talk as much as I would love to, in friendship ways. So the best way to get an hour with you, or the best way to set aside an hour for me, is to do it for a podcast. So here we are.
I know. So we'll just talk like friends and see if we can make sure we don't get canceled. It'll be great.
Right. And see if Sam can make a listenable episode out of it.
Right. Exactly.
Good luck, Sam. Well, for everyone listening, I feel like our audience, Cory, has so much familiarity with you for many things. I imagine our audience, which trends towards adventure and mountains, they know you have the only American winter ascent of an 8,000 meter peak. They know you've summited Everest without oxygen. I'm sure they've seen your photographers as a Nat Geo photographer, including a cover and just so many photos that kind of, for me, over the past 2 decades, in many ways, like, they defined the sport and kind of like the dreams that I had in some ways. Of course, there was the film Cold. And then over your past decade, you've become well known as an outspoken advocate for mental health and for talking about mental health in the US. But I also want to share with the audience, like, to me, you're all those things, of course, but you're also a friend and a brother through our climbing experiences, right? You and I spent 2 years together attempting Everest without oxygen. And what I saw during those years were, of course, your superpowers above 8,000 meters and your ability to suffer and to laugh and play through it and take photos even when everything sucks. But I think maybe less known about you, and like when I look back on those experiences, is really your emotional intelligence that allowed you to be such a powerful partner for me, to find what I needed and then to give me exactly those things through those years. Like I largely, and I know you know this, but the audience might not, like I largely credit my success and enjoyment of, or enjoyment now, looking back a decade later, of climbing Everest without oxygen was thanks to you. So
I
that's
think
that's how I wanted to introduce you.
That's high praise, man. I always felt it's so funny, you know, how we remember things so differently. You know, I always felt like I was, and I guess that's a sign of a good partnership too in the mountains, is that oftentimes you feel like you're not the one giving the energy. In fact, you're the one receiving the energy that's pulling you up the mountain, whatever it happens to be. So to hear that is so special to me, because I always felt like you were the driving force, that you were giving me the energy, that you were like, you know, you were the, because obviously, I mean, there's the base level stuff where you were always a better athlete. So I was always sort of like trying to keep up, basically. And so just to hear
until
you
your
say
Clark
that is so
Kent
special.
moment of ripping off your stupid suit and glasses at 8,000 meters and turning into Superman.
Yeah. I don't know about it. It was a lucky day. It was a good day. It was a good day. It was a low gravity day that day. But I just really appreciate you saying that. It's, you know, it has been a very special journey with you for so many years. And yeah, you know, it's funny. You said something right at the beginning. It's like, it's sad to me that like we just do need to talk more, and that's just a personal. We just need to talk more. You know, so much has happened. You've got a child. Like, I mean, oh my God. Meanwhile, I like disappeared and crawled under a rock, and you know, spit some words out into a computer screen. So that's it. You know,
it's true. I mean, I certainly have some insight into where you've been the last few years, and that's one of the things we want to talk about. You know, on today's conversation. But you know, part of the reason you're here is, of course, your memoir, The Color of Everything, was recently released. And Cory's book, like one of the parts for me, it was like, you know, I loved reading all the stories from the olden days that I knew a lot about. But also I was like, I can't wait to get to like the last 4 or 5 years and learn about more and this journey that you've been on. That has been largely separate from me and probably a lot of your former adventure partners. It's been a big transition. And I think that's perhaps a good place to start with The Color of Everything. You would not describe The Color of Everything as an adventure book, right? An adventure memoir. How do you like to introduce The Color of Everything?
well, that's the thing. I mean, I had to, when I was writing this and when we were pitching it, I was like, this is not an adventure book. It's not an adventure book. And that, you know, and they're like, but the editors and the publisher, we have to lean into that. And of course, all the adventure stuff is in there, right? Like, because that's basically the vehicle, that's the through line that gives the story sort of a basic structure. It's skeletal, at least in, you know, sort of in the latter part of the book. But really the book is about, I always describe it as like a 3-layered onion, where it's like the outer layer is, yes, it's in fact my life story, but that starts in childhood, and it really, and then that outer layer spinning forward, going into the career with National Geographic and climbing and whatnot, is the container for the second layer, which is about mental health. And so using my childhood, all the way from childhood, and looking at family dynamics and what happens when we live in certain kinds of environments and how that impacts the way the brain develops and why we do the things we do and why we gravitate towards certain environments, or why I gravitated towards certain environments. That's really the second layer, which is this deep dive, this dissection of mental health, and sort of trying to approach it from different angles and see, why was I doing the things I was doing? Why do I do the things I do sometimes? And then the central layer is, or the central sort of cocktail onion, the pearl, is really the power of storytelling and the narratives that we tell, and how they can, you know, really set us free, or they can hold us captive. And sometimes our stories are actually not even accurate anymore. They're just something that we've repeated over and over and over again. And so the invitation there is to sort of step out of, for a moment, to relax the grip on the stories we're telling and examine, hey, are these harmful or helpful? But yeah, you're right. It's not like, there's climbing Everest and there's falling into the fucking Mediterranean and, with all my ropes on and nearly drowning. All of that stuff is in there. But I think as I hope as people read it, and this has been the majority of feedback is like, it's so weird. People are like, I've never climbed a mountain. I've never done any of this. And yet somehow I feel very seen in this book. That's really the point. And that's why it's like, look, there are so many great adventure memoirs. There are so many, I did this, look at the climb I did. This was sort of what was happening in my, but I was like, let's talk about something bigger. And that's really my only hope with it, is it invites people into a larger conversation about themselves. And my hope is it gives people permission to talk about some deeper shit. That's all.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it certainly does. Emily, my wife, Emily Harrington, also one of Cory's great friends. And you guys have adventured all over the world together. She has not read the book yet. And there was so many moments where I'd be like reading something and then trying to describe it to her, or be like, because there's just things in the book. There's triggers. I don't know if that's the right word for like, oh, I want to talk about that. Like maybe we're going to talk about, you talk about risk, you talk about the stories we tell ourselves, you talk about, like the stair stepper we can get on of needing bigger and badder and bigger and badder in adventure, which really resonates with me. But I think it's probably true in many kind of like careers where there's like this goal orientation. But there were so many subjects I think are not only applicable to adventurers or people who understand this world of 8,000 meter peak climbing or things like that, that invite discussion. And I think that's exciting.
It's like trying to it's using the extraordinary to illuminate the ordinary. And by making everybody's ordinary seen, validated, and heard, they themselves can feel extraordinary, because they are. Everybody's life is extraordinary. It's a miraculous experience. At least that's the way I view it. To be alive and to walk and to wake up and to breathe and to be contained in this meat suit that actually gets to experience all the different varieties of life, from pain to elation and everything in between. Confusion, to certainty, like that's really the cool, so you're using, you're just trying to make people feel seen, really. But truthfully, that's not how I started.
Yeah.
So,
well, I since you mentioned being seen, this isn't exactly what you're saying through that, but one of the things I think Sam and I both felt about the book, it is intensely personal. Like you laid so much out there of your story and of your struggles and of things that you did that you probably feel like, perhaps you were on the wrong path and then you adjusted and things like that. Like, how has it been releasing this and being seen in a truly exposed and deep way? Like,
it's such a good question. It's first of all, it's one thing when you say if you write a fiction book and people don't like it, it's like, cool, they don't like my story, they don't like the fiction, but you write a memoir and if people don't like it, it feels, for better and worse, at times like an indictment of you, because it's you. Right. It's like literally you, even if that's not necessarily what they're saying. But you're right, it is very deeply personal. So, and the other thing I really worked hard to do was to bridge that line between what's happening externally and what's happening internally. So, when, for example, the chapter when we're on Everest together, and I'm try to give people an experience of like what it's like to be in a tent at 8,300 meters with Adrian Ballinger at 11 p.m. watching the stove just pump moisture into the air and sitting there and having all these crystals falling all over you and realizing that this is where you are and sort of the magnitude of that, and stepping into these huge nights with so much uncertainty and meanwhile, like trying to balance it with, and this is all the shit that's going on in my head. And some of it is really mundane, and some of it could be profound, and then playing out that narrative, but doing that through all of the experiences. But to the point of personal stuff, it's challenging. It feels very, at least it felt very challenging and very scary at first. But since it's come out, the reality is I feel less and less attached to it. A friend of mine the other day was like, I hope this gives you the launch that you're looking for, or whatever. And I was like, you know what? I'm really not looking for that. I don't, it's the book, people will do with it. It doesn't belong to me anymore, if that makes sense. Now it belongs to you. And I think that's true of all art. Is it scary? For sure. Is it hard for a mother like my mom to read this book? You bet. Is it hard for other mothers to read this book? It can be, because there's things that are happening that no parent would ever want to happen to a child ever, right? So it's confronting, because it's also looking at those relationships, and even like in my own personal life. And I really value this process that I'm going through with my partner, where we're navigating, she knows so much about me, and she knows so many things that a lot of times a partner would never learn, because maybe it's not, you know what I mean? And so balancing that and having to learn myself, having to take on the compassion for like, yeah, that's got to be really fucking scary and hard for you to read some of these things and know these things. And then the work for us is getting past that. So she's like, and I realize it's I love you. So this thing, all of this is what makes you you. So as much as some of those points are like, really sticky, how could I, it's such a fascinating thing. But those are the only relationships where I'm like actually affected by it. If somebody reads this in a broader audience and they're like, whatever they want to say, the chorus, the gallery of the internet sleuths. All right. Who cares? Like, I don't, whatever, that's fine.
And has that been a process, not necessarily through this book, but through your life, to get to who cares? Like a lot of stuff has been highly external at times, right? Like looking for external feedback or positivity or accolades.
Well, yeah, I mean, and you and I, when we were on Everest, and we're doing Everest No Filter, which at the time I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. When I look back on it, I'm actually like, that was actually pretty fucking groundbreaking what we were doing. It was really cool. Yes, we were part of this real-time storytelling that's had both positive and negative impacts, or it's changed the way we do stuff in the mountains. It's changed the way adventure content, if you want to call it that, is consumed and made. But it was relevant in that it was sort of a visible experiment that was taking place in real time, right? And so much of that was, for me, at least on some level, and subconsciously, but also consciously, really was about being seen. Like, look at me, look at me, look at me. And through the book, we kind of explore this narrative of like learning a story very early on in my life that for one reason or another, I didn't really matter that much. Now, that's not something that was explicitly told to me. It was my interpretation of actions that were going on around me. And so that's one of those stories that I talk about, where then I started to live in the story, and then photography and climbing, in some ways, not exclusively, but in some ways, became methods of wanting to be validated simply as a human being, right? Like, look, I'm, look at me. And so there's this misunderstanding that the attention is somehow love, or that attention is foundational relevance, like I matter as a human because other people love me, which isn't the case, right? And so that's what I think ultimately I realized finally, that no matter how much attention I got, or no matter what I did in the mountains, or no matter how many pictures I took, or how many fucking Instagram followers or Snapchat, whatever, it wasn't going to go anywhere. It would never be enough, ever. ever.
Yes.
I could keep going forever and it would never be enough.
Yep. And that sort of ties back to like one of the things, again, tying back to this idea of like so much within alpinism is like taking more risk, going to the next higher mountain, the next bigger mountain, things like that, taking more risk, more. And it's something I really feel a internal struggle with and talk a lot with my family about and my friends and things like that with me personally, like how if the cycle needs broken, how to break it, why to break it, and if it doesn't need broken, why it's important enough to me to stay on that cycle or that path of doing increasingly potentially risky things, or even just same level of risk but another, right? As so many of us and our peers do. And you making this choice to step off, to break that cycle, whether it's more pictures or more mountains or just more love and adoration. Like, obviously this is a significant kind of theme in the book, but how does it feel today? You've now been sort of out of this adventure world mostly for a few years.
3.5 years. Yeah.
3.5 years. Yeah. Like, how's asking for a friend? How's it going?
So I'm just asking for a friend. Look, it's so weird. We got home last night. We were in New York, and we stepped in, and Jess, my partner, hadn't seen the second book, which is coming out in October, which is a photo book.
Damn.
And
you've been busy.
I've been busy, but it doesn't seem like it, like there have been days where I'm like, I'm not doing enough. I'm just bored. What's going on? But then you look at it and you're like, okay, here's this output. And then you look at that in comparison to the history. You're like, this is the thing. I always feel bored, like I'm not doing enough. And yet when you look back at it, it's like, oh shit, you actually are doing a lot of things. So that's something that I've had to really recognize is that, yes, I'm still producing. It's just in a different way, but also is producing the goal? That's a question that I keep coming up against. But I feel in many ways more at peace because for so long, when we'd go do big trips, like remember us leading up to Everest in 2016. And then again in 2017, and then again in 2019, and then Dhaulagiri in 2021. I was so focused on death. It's so interesting that like I was so scared, and I lived in so much fear and anticipation for so long. And I don't know if that was, were you always thinking about dying in the months leading up to Everest? I'm just curious, actually.
No. Nope.
Yeah. Okay. I'm always thinking about dying. So like I had this like 20-year meditation on my own mortality. And the only thing that would but I just kept feeding into it. So there's a definite ease that exists now since I've stepped away from it because I don't feel that need. And I'm also not playing with my own life in my mind constantly. But also there is, because of the heightened stimulation of that kind of brain patterning, there is a quiet that can be very uncomfortable. And that is ultimately, I think that discomfort is what I was in some ways, not always, in some ways using climbing and big expeditions to escape, because that discomfort has always been there. So it's kind of like now I'm in the process, or I have been, and I feel much more solid in it, but in the process of learning who I really am versus what I do, instead of confusing, okay, I'm doing this thing, so that must be who I am, versus, oh no, I am whole and complete without any of that. And that's just something that I do. So there's a quietness, but there's also a confusion. And also, I don't think that it's gone entirely. Like you and I are already whispering about going and playing in the mountains next fall. And I think for me, the shift has been that I want to go do those things to see, but not to be seen, and that's been a monumental, beautiful shift in my own life that I don't I'm like, I just want to go I just want to be on a fucking tiny tent platform with you at 8,000 meters looking at shit, versus like saying, look where I am. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. And that's funny. I was kind of like jotting down possible things I'd love to discuss with you, and you did even at the end of the book, you teased a little bit, right? Or at least for me, as a just diehard adventurer, I'm like, he said he's going to take more pictures. He said he's going to write more words. He said he might climb more mountains, and I'm like, like I wonder how many people read that and were like, what does that mean? What's he got planned? And obviously you and I have chatted a bit offline, but that makes a lot of sense to me. Like, it's not that those things are necessarily done, right? But it's that perhaps the intention and the reasons for doing them need to feel different, and they will feel different. That's where you are, or where you plan to be if you do go back to some of those things.
Yeah, I just want them to be, the reason I started doing them was because I found such a sense of ease in them. Like I look, like climbing as a kid, being with my dad and my brother and skiing in those early mornings. I remember the silence of the early mornings after a big snowfall. I remember, learning how to bivvy with my dad. I remember the first forced open bivouac that I had to do. I think I was 12 years old, and we were climbing in the Wind Rivers. We did this big route, not very hard, up in the Titcomb Basin, and we got caught by a lightning storm on top, and then benighted on the way back down. And I remember we were, my dad was like, well, this is part of it. And rocking up under this huge granite boulder and sort of making as level a platform underneath as we could. And four of us, my dad, and I think it was five of us, crawling under this boulder and huddling together, three adolescent kids and two, grown men, and the magic of it, and sort of the mystery of it. And sure, the sort of swelling hubris of, oh my God, we survived, but also just the intensity of that kind of bonding experience. That kind of thing is what I'm really, I love. And that's more what I'm interested in, is just rediscovering the magic and the purity of it, instead of having it all clouded by sponsorship obligations and sort of the big chest pounding stuff. Like, how about this? If we go do something really awesome, I'll just play second fiddle to you the whole time. Yeah, I'll be your cameraman. Like, I don't care anymore. Not that you care. I just don't give a shit anymore.
Cory knows I got to make a living still.
Right.
It kind of ties to, the Duffel Shuffle podcast, and why we named it the Duffel Shuffle is it's not about the summits for most adventurers. It's about the chaos and the stories and the memories and the process of getting there. Half of the adventure stories that, ring true to me are the travel experiences and the travel in different countries and the culture. The climbing itself is just a small portion that often takes way too much time of the whole trip.
No, and that is what if I miss something, you just named them. It's the textures, it's the smells, it's the sounds, it's the movement, it's the motion, it's the curiosity, it's the mystery and the intrigue of discovering new places, or places that you've been that you're rediscovering. It's deepening in knowledge. And that, I think you nail it. And I think at some point for me, it became less about shuffling the duffels, and more about, okay, the end goal of that whole purpose. And when it became about the ends and not the means, then the ends had to be amplified every time we went out. It had to be bigger, better, faster, more, for it to seemingly matter. And that actually ties into sort of the way, I'm bipolar too. The book talks about that. People with bipolar tend to display, even before they're diagnosed, they tend to display higher goal setting. They're setting larger goals. And they also, in that, tend to have a deeper they conflate value with accomplishment, right? And so as these goals became bigger, and certainly as as they became my profession, then all of a sudden it's no longer about the joy of discovery, but about the goal that you've set. And one of the things I talk about a lot is like, basically, and you talk to fucking anybody in any industry who gets to a certain level, and always the box is empty. There's the box at the top of the mountain. It's always empty. But you think it's going to be full of gold every time. And you're just like, fuck, it's empty. And so, I think just like that, there is no box there. Actually, it's the Duffel Shuffle, to put it, is the joy. That's the joy.
And do you think about adventuring in a different way that has nothing to do with climbing? Say, paddleboarding a river, or, hiking a through hike, or some non-climbing adventure that might feed that need without any association with climbing?
Well, last year, it's such a great question. I feel, it could be any modality, really. I'm like, some of them don't appeal to me as much, but
yeah,
like last year, I'd always wanted to ride a motorcycle and like learn how to, and I didn't know how. And so I just called Ben Ayers and I was like, hey man, do you want to go ride motorcycles from Kathmandu to Lomontong in Nepal, which is like, 500 kilometers. He's like, sure, let's do that. I didn't know how to ride a motorcycle.
Did he know you didn't know how to ride a motorcycle?
I mean, kind of, and so, but that was so I learned how to ride a motorcycle in 5 days around my house here in Santa Monica. And I got on a plane and then we rode, 1,000 kilometers through the Himalaya, basically. And I love that adventure. It's a totally different flavor. I don't get quite the same physical like I'm not as physically satiated because it's a different kind of thing. But at the same time, it has its own romance to it. And it's just marvelous. So absolutely, yes, I think there's different ways to adventure. I'd be happy just going for long ass walks in the Himalaya these days, or in traversing a desert. I mean, all of that appeals to me. Yeah.
It's interesting in reading your book. I know you as a climber of the greater ranges, and learning about your mental health struggles made me question if, greater range climbing was the best thing for you. Certainly physically you have a skill set, but greater range climbing is a lot of acclimatization. It's a lot of, kind of mundane actions for that summit. And maybe the tent time was, maybe there's more adventure that you can do outside of the greater ranges that will feed you more.
I mean, I think a lot of times when there's more curiosity involved, when there's more social interface or cultural interface, that can be really helpful for me. But I also think that the big ranges provide a backdrop in which there's a reduction that becomes like, when you're climbing on Everest or whatever it happens to be in the Himalaya, that you have to be pretty reduced in a healthy way, where you basically boil it down to your elemental functions. And in some ways there's a lot of quiet there. And that quiet was very beneficial for a very long time. The other thing though that I think about a lot is, we think of dopamine as like the pleasure, we do something and we get a hit of dopamine. That's actually not how dopamine works. And I've been learning more and more about this. Dopamine is the anticipation like it's the anticipation chemical. So when, say, an addict is trying to score, right, or whatever you want to call it, whatever your addiction is, sex, drugs, climbing, for example, your highest level of dopamine release is in the pursuit of the thing. It's not when you take the first hit. That's not when the dopamine comes in. It's peaks before that. So it's always in the attainment. It's always the searching of the thing. It's not in the attainment of the thing. It's in the searching of the thing that you're getting all your dopamine hits, right? So that's something that I've looked back on and going, oh, that's why I was constantly moving forward to the next thing, because I'm living in a hyper dopamine infused lifestyle, to the point of like, and then you stand on top and you go, that's why when we stand on top, there's no dopamine on the summit. There's
Right.
very little dopamine, right? And I think I just exhausted that. So I think, to your point, all adventure in whatever capacity it comes, for me, it's really important that I reset it to an understanding that it's I need to engage more with the moment and being there and appreciating for what it is versus seeking out the next thing.
Hell yeah. And
yeah.
Do you think, I mean, just what you just mentioned about addiction, and you've obviously struggled with addiction and worked a lot on addiction, your own addictions. Like, do you think it's possible to be addicted to what we do, to climbing, to adventure, to risk? Like, is that a thing?
Of course. You can absolutely be addicted. I mean, I would say I was addicted to it. But what I would also say is, yes, and I was addicted to the chemical sort of mix that the lifestyle created, right? That's really what I'm addicted to. So anytime I have a coping mechanism or a coping strategy, whatever it happens to be, climbing, alcohol, sex, you name it, that's helping me, and I put that in quotes because it can be maladaptive, right? That's helping me navigate or even avoid certain discomforts. That's when it becomes problematic. But absolutely, you can be addicted to these things. It just takes on a different. Again, we like climbing in general and being outside and doing this. It's pretty healthy activity, right? So, but just because the activity is healthy doesn't mean that what you're doing it for or what you're getting from it is healthy.
Absolutely.
Certainly, it's better than heroin, but at the same time, if it's a maladaptive coping mechanism, it's still maladaptive, and it's still probably it will become net negative. And especially when you're looking at an activity like climbing, especially high altitude climbing or high altitude alpinism that can kill you, well, you're really talking about the same thing, right? You're still in a very high risk environment. The only thing that's different is you're not hurting other people, or you're not involved in crime.
Right.
But it's very, very similar the way the brain works.
You might be hurting other people in lots of different ways through what we do, but certainly it's not a crime.
Right.
And another thing you said I wanted to circle back to is, being bipolar maybe was part of why, these desires for greatness, and maybe you'd set really audacious out there goals. Like, do you think greatness does sometimes come from that? How do you think about bipolar, and like these incredible things happen, whether it's in sport or music or other activities? Maybe partially someone sets those wildly audacious goals because of mental health challenges. How do you think about that?
It's such a great question. It's such a good question. Well, you look at, first of all, I want to address one. We always talk about balance. I need to be more balanced. I need to be more balanced. Well, balance is stasis, and stasis is great for certain things. But when we look at the big achievements throughout history, whatever they happen to be them in sport, technology, whatever, these achievements were not created in states of balance. They never were. In fact, the imbalance seems to drive, in many ways, the innovation. And that innovation could be, in whatever. But you talk to a lot of CEOs or founders who started these incredible organizations or companies, and they look back and they're sort of, after they've come out of that insane fog, and they go, well, had I not been manic or hypomanic or whatever, I almost certainly never would have created what I created, nor would I have had the energy to do so. But this is dangerous. And I'm not saying it's not true, but it's dangerous because in some ways then the story of sort of the need to be in balance to create big, amazing things gets perpetuated. And it seems to be in some ways very true, right? So one of the things that I write a little bit about in the book is sort of the mad genius or the tortured artist thing, where we think that, in order to create great art, we have to be tortured, or in order to change the world, we have to be imbalanced. It's a yes and. It's true, but it's also not true, right? You don't have to be tortured to make great art, and you don't have to be fucking off your rocker to create big things. There are plenty of people who haven't, but balance, I would say, is very rarely present in the creation and execution of big goals. It can't be, right? They're incompatible. You can be balanced on a day-to-day level, but your bias in those chapters of life is not balanced. At all. In any way, shape, or form. So it's hard. I wish I knew how to walk that line more effectively, or not. Fuck it. Maybe that's the gift. I think of bipolar, generally speaking, for me as the biggest gift I've ever been given. And I'm also very reticent to really heavily identify with it. It's just a label that says this is how brains with this neurodivergence tend to function. But the identity of bipolar, I think, can get really net negative and pretty sticky for people.
So as when you think about these mental health challenges that you've obviously had, bringing those into the world of adventure, like, we certainly have, and we've had great success together. Of course, in your book, you also touch on, sort of a team falling apart in 2021 on Dalagiri, I think.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, I love everyone who was on that team deeply, and it was so hard to watch and to try to understand from the outside. But what would you encourage me or potential teammates or people who go into the mountains, like, what questions should we be asking? How should we be trying to understand each other as partners, and how can we better support someone who perhaps does have mental health struggles? I mean, I think we all have mental health struggles, first of all, to be clear.
For sure.
They might not all be defined and labeled and things like that. But like, how can we be better partners in this world that you're speaking to?
Oh man, that is such a beautiful, thank you for that. All of your questions, guys, have been great. I really like it when people ask, and they're not like, how do you take a shit in a down suit on Everest? You're like, oh my God.
We're going to get to that.
Yeah, we're going to get to that one. Just a quick backstory. So, and I go over it in depth in the book, but Topo and I were trying to climb a new route on Everest, and we attempted it in 2019. Then COVID happened. Everest season got canceled. We were going to go with UAB and use that infrastructure of, Alpenglow. And so then we were like, well, in 2021, Everest season gets canceled again. We had been training really hard, and we're like, let's go to Dalagiri and try to do something on the Northwest Ridge, the Northwest Face. And so we're making a film about my parents and my family and my dad dying of cancer at this point. We've invested a lot of money. Topo and I have been training for years. We're at base camp. We fly in. And all of a sudden I'm like kind of off my rocker. I kind of like lose. Yeah, I wasn't out of control in any ways, but the way it presented was I wasn't sleeping, then I wasn't eating, then I started having all these racing thoughts, and I was really emotionally just like, I couldn't hold on. And that wasn't expressed outwardly towards the team. This was something that I was aware was taking place internally, but ultimately it resulted in me doing basically, pulled the ripcord at base camp before we'd even gotten onto the mountain. And I left, and I didn't just leave the expedition. I left climbing and photography completely. And, for people at base camp, Topo, especially Topo and Carla, who I was climbing with, they were like, what the fuck is going on? And then it just seemed like I exited, and to, at least outwardly, it appeared to them like there was just this zero accountability. All I knew in the moment was something is wrong. I have to leave. That's what I knew. Yep. I came home and it was, I sat down and there was a deeply suicidal spell because now all of this confusion, there was a lot of anger involved as well. and I felt, in every way like I had let people down. And what I didn't understand until a little bit later was like I was in what's called a mixed bipolar episode, which is when you've got, you're sort of hypomanic and marvelously depressed at the same time. So your brain and your world really isn't making sense of anything. And so when that became evident to me, I was like, oh, this makes sense. But to the team, it still didn't make sense because it's an outward, they're just watching behaviors and they're going, this is what the fuck you just pulled out. And so I just wanted to give the backdrop to that. And what was so baffling for everybody is like, well, wait a minute, like, is this just an excuse to just like, and it's like, no, this is not an excuse in any way, shape, or form. This is a external expression of an internal I don't want to call it malfunctioning, but neurodivergent state, right? This is what happens. And so it's not as easy. It's a great analogy. It's like, well, if you broke your ankle on an expedition, nobody would care. It's a medical emergency. You get evacuated, done. Okay, bummer. We spent some money. If you have a mental health emergency, because it appears through actions, it's much harder to give it that same grace. And yet, medically speaking, it's the same thing. But to people involved, it sure doesn't feel that way. Sure. And so, and I think one of the hard things about that for me was that I was like, I've been telling people like, no, I deal with this stuff. I deal with this. Like, this is a real thing. And everybody's like, yeah, okay, of course, whatever. Like, great. Yeah, no, mental health, no big deal. Like, I'm cool. I'm with it. I'm hip. But then when the rubber hits the road and it affects people externally, it's much, much harder. So then I felt like, Jesus Christ, how much more can I say about this? But also I had to make space for the fact that the way they're experiencing it and understanding it, is they can't understand in the same way that I can't understand what it feels like to be a woman. You can't understand what it feels like to be in one of these situations until you've experienced it. So what I say now is I don't expect people to understand. I just need people to believe that what I'm saying is accurate. And to your point, I know that's a long way into your question here, but like all that we can ask for is a genuine depth of honesty and the ability to have open discourse and dialogue around what our partners are feeling and experiencing without knee-jerk reactions and with some level of compassion and diplomacy when things might be affecting our best laid plans, right? One of the things that I really appreciate about you, Adrian, you and Monica specifically, is like, I was always capable of saying, hey, I feel kind of fucking off right now. And I could talk to Monica, who was our doctor on these trips. And there was it was just very pragmatic and there was no emergency feeling around it. You kind of, for better, I don't know where your ability to do that came from, because it could have just been like, I don't know what to do, but you were never, you were never judgmental. So I think in terms of our partners, it's just understanding our partners on a deeper level and not just being like, yeah, you struggle with that, cool. But really being curious about it as we go into the mountains and not having it be a thing. It's just like, okay, what are our contingencies? What do I need to look out for? What's our communication strategy? How do you start, if you're going into like a cycle or something that's not prohibitive of fucking climbing a mountain at all, but if you're going into a cycle, like, what should I look out for? And sort of like, what's our safe word in some ways, and I think that's
why it worked. We always had a safe word, Cory.
We always had a safe word. Cucumber. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's really it is just, it's more conversation with less judgment.
Yep.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point because I think there's so much hesitation in our society to address these topics. Mm-hmm. And people are scared when they don't have the same experience or understanding of mental health to ask the questions. And that's the root of the problem is the lack of education and the lack of understanding across our society amongst people that do and don't struggle with the same mental health issues. And just having those open and honest conversations seems like kind of at least the start of a better societal, impact.
I 100% agree. And the other thing that I want to point out though, is that like, I talk about this a little bit in the book, is when people start learning of their trauma, and I think that's great. When people start learning of their, ADHD or whatever label they want to call themselves or not, it's really easy to hide behind this stuff too. And I say that in the full recognition that I did. Dalagiri was absolutely not that, but I had in the past, because I knew all this language, I knew all the psychological jargon, I knew all of it. I could sort of sidestep some accountability in situations, especially when I was younger. I'd be like, well, I'm, kind of like, I'm fucked up. Look at my problem. So sort of give me the hall pass. Dalagiri was absolutely not that. And I don't think I ever did anything in the mountains like that. But certainly I see that at a cultural level where we're all learning of our trauma, and then we're getting stuck in that story. And then we're learning of a diagnosis, be it ADHD or whatever, that's a hot one right now. Oh, I'm ADHD. All of the things, all of the labels do is they help us understand potentially the framework around what's happening, but it really shouldn't, in my estimation, ever be a place to hide. And yet I understand how easy that is, because when, we make a mistake, and it impacts other people, it's very easy to be like, yeah, but I'm this way. So, and I don't support that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the things you kind of described that we can do essentially feel like the basics or fundamentals of partnership, right? Of good partnership or good
partnership,
good relationships as well. We're talking about like better communication, open communication, deep honesty, compassion, right? Like that like compassion and empathy. Again, like talking to Emily about things that really connected with me personally in the book. And I think there is so much in the book that different people will connect to, different stories you share or challenges you've had or things to focus on. I'm like, empathy, like this whole description of like, not just, going with logic and intelligence and fixing things, but first like trying to understand what a partner is going through. And that could be really hard, right? Because we have our own shit that we're dealing with, or goals or things like that. But I feel like the description, like what you just spent the last few minutes talking about, is like how to be a good partner.
Yeah. I mean, it's how to be a good partner in your romantic relationships, your deep friendships, whatever they happen to be. That one of the things that Jess and I work on, and she is the best partner I've ever had, because not only is she patient and kind, not only does she, not only is she curious, but she's curious about herself, and she models the exact kind of partner in every friendship, and climbing partnership, romantic partnership, that I think anybody could ask for. And one of the things that happens is we both run up against this, and this is just using the model that you're talking about, Adrian, is that when somebody shares their experience, we immediately, because all of life is relational. I mean, I relate to this desk, meaning I'm sitting at a desk. Without the desk, there, see what I mean? All of life is relational. So when somebody communicates an experience, we immediately experience it in a relational context, which means we make it about us, which is normal. What you're advocating for, and what I'm hearing, and what I totally agree with, is it works best even if what's being communicated is difficult at the time, it resolves more quickly if we can go, oh shit, I'm relating it to me, but this isn't really about me right now. So, if somebody's telling me that they see horns growing out of my eyeballs, as much as I might not even, I think that's absolutely crazy. The reality is they might see horns growing out of my eyeballs. So to sit there and be with them while they describe these horns growing out of my eyeballs can be I'm like, there's no fucking horns. But to them, there might be. And to be curious about that is really good partnership and to listen to it, you know.
Do I have horns growing out of my eyes? That's a strangely specific
No.
story.
They're growing out of your ears, Adrian. I see them. It's you look more like a stag.
Gosh, now I'm thinking about horns and ears.
Right.
Just threw me right off my line of questioning.
That's great.
There's so many more things I want to talk about, and I know Sam's going to cut us off soon. Meditation. We got to talk about meditation because I got to be honest. I was reading the book, and I got to the point where you're like, okay, everyone can meditate. You're going to meditate right now. Stop, set a timer for 1 minute, put the book down, meditate. You know exactly what I did, Cory, because you know me so well. I skipped over and kept moving.
Right. And kept reading. Yeah.
Of course I did.
Exactly.
I can't meditate. I can't stop for a minute. Tell me about the practice of meditation, if it's still a large part of your life, why we should do it. What does it mean to you?
So meditation can mean a number of different things, right? I tend to segment, mindfulness is sort of this big bucket that I put this stuff in. Meditation is one practice of mindfulness. Another is flow, right? You get into a creative state, a climbing state, running, whatever it happens to be. That I would call that flow. Mindfulness overall is, you can practice moments of mindfulness in your daily life, and mindfulness being sort of a practice of presence where you are conscious and aware of, the motion your arm is taking and the texture of the handle that you're reaching for and the amount of pressure that you have to push to open your front door. That is a moment of mindfulness that locks you back into presence. It's, so there's many different ways to experience this. I tend to think of standard meditation as the practice of sitting or following breath or mantra or something like that, which is different than being in flow. They can have a similar sort of experience to them, but they're very different, because to sit down and meditate requires a lot more effort than to go for a run. Does that make sense?
Hell yeah, it does.
So, because if we like running, if that's comfortable, we're like, I'm going to go run and that's my meditation. Well, kind of. Yes, it's an act of mindfulness and flow.
But we're getting really chemical hits right away. And
right.
Just feels so good.
It's totally different. It feels so good, and there's nothing wrong with it. For me, meditation and my meditation practice comes in waves. And one of the things that I've noticed is when I am not meditating on a consistent basis, and that can be 10 minutes a day, it can be an hour a day. When that falls out of my life, I notice a drastic decrease in sort of I would say an increase in anxiety and a decrease in sort of comfort. Just general living comfort. And so I try to work it in. And the best method that I've found when I'm really in my flow, and there's a little, I'll add a little bit to this answer too, because it's not just meditation, but I just do it immediately first thing in the morning. Now, some people say you have to sit up, you have to be like a monk no, fuck that. If you can wake up, prop your back up on your bed and follow your breath for 10 minutes, that's a great time to do it, because you're actually much closer to that brain state that deep meditation strives for. So you're sort of in that half sleep, half awake. You just sit up and do it before you do anything else. If you have to
coffee,
go pee, because that's going to, no coffee, definitely not coffee.
Not for you, Adrian.
Don't inject caffeine into your system right before you try to meditate. But that's the way I do it. I just wake up. And the other thing that I'm exploring and realizing, and I have a new sort of blog coming out on Psychology Today, which is that I've discovered that I have pillars of sort of wellness in my life. And if I hit those pillars every day, there's 8 of them. And I've identified them. I'm really working on formulating this into a system, but meditation is one of those, is key to those. So it would be meditation, movement, reading, journaling, social interaction, right? And then there's work. So a sense of purpose, aligning with purpose, creativity, because also a sense of alignment with creativity, and giving. Mm-hmm. So if I can do one, if I can meditate for 5 minutes, if I go for a walk, that's meditation, movement. If I read for 5 minutes, if I just journal and jot down those 8 things, if I can hit those, on a daily basis, life and mental health are fucking smooth sailing. But if I can hit 5 of them, great. If I can hit 3 of them, great. It's when you start pulling away one piece here and there, all of a sudden you're not doing any of them. And maybe you're only doing work and then you're just pissed off about it,
Yeah.
So, but meditation plays a huge role in that because it makes all of the others somehow seem less daunting and more achievable.
You said those 8 pillars they're written somewhere already, or this is something you're working on?
No. So don't steal it. That'd be copyright infringement. You'll be stealing my intellectual property. I just copyrighted it right now. Yeah. No, not you. Anybody who's listening. No.
No, I swear I'm not going to, Cory. No, I'm not going to write
my next book.
They certainly on 8 things that I automatically think about myself, but like when you just described them, I'm like, that would be a good day. Like, that sounds like a good day. I would add coffee.
Do you think people have different pillars?
I think people are going to have different expressions of those pillars, right? But when you're looking at the basic, and not everybody's going to meditate, right? But movement can be anything. But I think the pillars themselves, what they represent, are pretty concrete, right? Especially when you look at the research that we've done on what it means to, life fulfillment. Some people call it happiness. I think it's the wrong word, or it's not a word that resonates with me. We're not always happy, and nor should we be. That's not life. But fulfilling life, I think those things are consistent we know that giving gives us a greater sense of fulfillment. We know that aligning with our purpose gives us a greater sense of fulfillment. The responsibility does. Social, when I say social, that can be relationship, but it's also outside of your romantic relationships. It's taking time to talk to a friend. That can be on the phone, even better in person. So that's really about community building. Creativity is doodle for 5 minutes. Like, that's it. It's creating all sorts of little connections in the brain where we just sit down to take a minute and let our mind wander and be creative. There's a tremendous amount of creativity when you're drawing a design and you're making little dots and you're just playing with it. Your brain is functioning in a totally unique way at that point. And again, I think when you say there's 8 things you have to do, people are like, oh, fuck, I'm never going to do that. These things don't have to take a tremendous amount of time. If you do them consistently, the time will obviously expand around them, but it doesn't mean that you have to spend 4 hours a day doing this routine. That's incomprehensible. Most people would never do it,
The Color of Everything, Cory, the title, I didn't know where it came from. I was reading all book, like, when am I going to learn where the title is, like, where'd it come from? And when it finally came, I was like, yes, I love the gray area. But I just wanted to know a little bit, like, did you choose the title? Was that a publisher decision? And like, can you describe, obviously it's in the book, but what it means to you, The Color of Everything?
Yeah. So the original title the working title for my book when I first started writing it was called Gray Matters. Because, the gray matter is what we refer to the brain as, it's the gray matter. And as I started to peel back my own story and I started to see how nothing that I've ever experienced, as concrete as I thought it was ever black and white, I started to see, life happens in shades of gray. It's black and white gives us some level of comfort. It's this duality. Like, I know this is right and this is wrong. This is good and this is bad. And yet, as I looked at every experience I've ever had, be it mental health, climbing, any of the conflicts that I've come up in life, it was always more complicated than black or white. Always, always, always. So I like the idea of, gray matter. Let's talk about psychology in the brain, but also life is experienced in shades of gray. But when I saw that I literally witnessed the horizon, and people see it if we're paying attention. You live on the ocean long enough, you'll see days where you don't know where the sky ends and the sea starts. And it's usually sort of like on a misty, overcast day, and it's just this incredible, beautiful middle gray. And it also is so, metaphorically, there's just no end and no beginning. Like the earth and the sky and space, it's all one thing. And this beginning and end, and the black and white and the binaries just seem to go away. And when I was watching that, I was like, well, gray is the color of everything. And I said, no, that's the title. That's the title because. And also just another point of this is that if you go out and you buy a paint set of 250 paints and you put them all equal amounts onto an easel and mix them all up, what do you get? Middle gray.
I don't know. Who would
you get middle gray? Right?
That's
like,
so cool.
Like you get gray. And so, that's it. It's all the colors of life, but it's the fact that they're, when we hold on to our stories and we believe we know them so much, they're so right, they're so wrong. We do it for safety, for comfort, but it actually ends up in conflict because it leaves no room for the middle, which is where we're all experiencing life, right? Mm-hmm. That's where it's all happening. So that's where the title comes from. Thanks for asking that question.
I just love it. I mean, that really resonates with me that like, at the end of the day, so much of life is in the gray, right? It's in this middle zone, and it's where we can probably best connect with people and like have more understanding for people. And the idea of like your description, you often see it in an ocean. Like I felt it most greatly actually on Mount Vincent, the tallest peak in Antarctica. And Antarctica, it's often difficult to tell sky from land. And the most powerful experience I've had that it's not gray down there very often. It doesn't snow much. It's always sunny kind of. But on one of my trips, I had this like overcast day and there was absolutely no possible way to tell land from sky. Everything was gray. And it's like one of the more like powerful mountain like scenes I've had in my life.
Isn't it beautiful? It just all blends into one thing. And it's really a message of, unity. I mean, I think I don't want to get I'm not on my own high horse here, but I think for me, if I had to define my purpose, it would be to generate connection, a deeper connection with ourselves, which helps us connect with others, which drives towards compassion, which ultimately fosters unity. I mean, that's the whole point. All this stuff that I do, that's an action that's designed to support the purpose, but the purpose is to help unify ourselves with ourselves and others in a less transactional and combative way. And that's what I really care about, and I think I just use mental health as a vehicle to tell that story, because I think there's a lot there,
Yeah, that might be your answer too. I was going to ask sort of like, in this journey that you're on and you've become such a voice for mental health in our adventure communities, but I think far beyond that as well. You've released this memoir and told your story. Like, I was sort of wondering, like, how you see the state of the conversation around mental health in the United States today, and like, how would you deem like what your goal was? How would you deem success? I know we don't, you probably don't want to focus too much on those external things being your success, but where, I'm sure you do have goals and purpose through this conversation in this book.
Yeah, I mean, I think we hit on it briefly earlier. I think the conversation around mental health is good. Overall, it's good, incredibly so. I think it's helpful. I think it's helping bridge some gaps that, kind of like snow bridges, right? We think the bridge is solid, but then we step onto it. Snow bridges are the worst, and then all of a sudden the snow bridge collapses and we're in the middle. I think the conversation really exposes where those snow bridges are and breaks them down before we fall into these crevasses, to use sort of a climbing metaphor. But I think overall it's really good. I think also, and I talk about this in the book, as we learn more about mental health, it's very easy to fall into sort of an existence or an identity of victimhood. And for some reason right now, our culture seems to be rewarding victimhood. So when we learn of what our cultural traumas are, our historical traumas, our immediate traumas, oftentimes, then we use psychological language to help ourselves understand what's going on and why we're behaving certain ways, or why the things that happen to us have impacted the rest of our lives. I think it's really easy to get stuck there. And so on the one hand, I think that this conversation is really, really good. And on the other hand, I think it needs to be reiterated and stated. I say psychology and the understanding of psychology is an invitation out of victimhood, not into it. So it's a way to help us understand, but we have to be mindful of not getting stuck there and saying, well, this happened to me, ergo I have all this leeway to do this. That's not what this is.
Right.
Yeah. So I think I'm trying to, what I want to do is validate people's experiences and help people on whatever level they can feel seen. But I also want to encourage and remind people that we can't expect the world to accommodate for our trauma and our triggers. That's not the world's responsibility. It's our responsibility to heal those traumas and not be triggered. Anytime there's a trigger that we experience, I hate trigger warnings. Triggers are information. If we get triggered by something, that is a roadmap to where we need to look and do some work. Because the world is full of them, and it's always going to be full of them. And if we're constantly asking people to accommodate for us, then we necessarily have to accommodate for everybody else. And we know that that is not possible. So that's where I think the conversation around mental health can go kind of awry. It's like, oh, you said peanuts, and now I have a trigger because my great aunt died of a peanut allergy. Well, peanuts are a fucking part of life. So if that's really triggering for you, that's where the work needs to be done, So again, yes, and it's good stuff. And it can hold us captive.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I also just want to share, going back to the book itself, there were so many moments I could pull out of it and things like that I loved. But I think the key is, and I might have said this earlier, it is a page turner. And I didn't know that going in. Like I knew there would be adventure in it. I knew I'd go from beginning to end. Like I don't not finish books.
Because you had to.
But like it is so dang readable, and as I think a lot of it is like these moments that you describe. And this might be like a writer, I dream of writing a book one day. I should just say I talk a lot about writing a book. That's how I just expect it to happen one day if I keep talking about it. But one of the things that you did so well is you chose moments and then you brought people 100% into those moments. Like the one that obviously I know the best was, us almost dying as our tent was collapsing from a never-ending snowstorm at a night at 24,000 feet on Mount Everest. And I was like, of course I remember that night. It's one of the more memorable, I think, experiences you and I have been through. But the level, the level of detail was exactly, I think, accurate, or at least that's what my brain tells me. And also is so visceral. And then there were moments of the story that I wasn't there for, from your childhood, from, later in life, things like that, where I felt that same power of the writing. I don't know whether there's a question here. I wanted to share that for everyone who's thinking should I read this book? I don't know. It sounds like there's a lot of gray in there, so I wanted to share that. And I also wanted to just ask, do you journal? Did you journal? Was a lot of that detail on paper, or was it in your brain? How did you find it?
It's such a good question. Thank you for that compliment. It is I learned early on just to write. And that I played with so many different styles, and anybody who's writing a book will know that you don't really find your voice. Maybe you find your voice immediately, but oftentimes it takes a lot. This took 2.5 years to write or 3 years to write. And and really it solidifies in the edit, right? And I also, people always say, write from the scar, not from the wound. And I really disagree. Write from the wound and edit from the scar. So you get all the good stuff in, and then you get but the point to the details, I joke that memoir is fiction and fiction is memoir. There's some crossover in the way that, like, anybody who's writing a fiction book is using stuff from their mind and their history and their past to bring these characters to life. And when you're writing memoir, especially when I was writing about my childhood, I would say that all the details are there, but how they come together is a bit of an act of alchemy, right? And so I never journaled until I picked it up much more recently, but because of photography, and I certainly think this is partly due because of hypervigilance, and also to some degree, there's some evidence in specific neurodivergent expressions that we can have profound attention to detail while blocking out entire, whole other swaths of experience, right? So when I was writing, I would try to just sort of close my eyes and picture what it was. And if I did that, and especially the deeper into the process of writing the book I got, the easier it was to remember details, and the easier it was to hear and see things coming out that I had completely forgotten. I mean, the mind is marvelous in the way that it stores detail. And the more you exercise that muscle of remembering, the more you start to remember. And then it's just piecing it together in a way that is not spoon feeding a reader, but at the same time gives them the invitation to be in the tent with you, so to speak. Like I loved that night, because I remember you're watching American Horror Story, and I was just like bummed that I couldn't watch it with you, and reading next to you, and I remember the color inside the tent, and I remember the shadows that I was seeing when I woke up, and you were basically buried under snow, and so fast asleep. And I was so like, how the fuck is it, anyway.
I remember being annoyed when you woke me up. It's just so true. That moment of annoyance, like, what the fuck, Cory? I don't care that you're having a bad night right now. Let me sleep. Right. And then being like, oh, yeah.
Oh, shit.
We're going to die.
We're getting pushed off a mountain. Yeah. It was a good night, man.
Spending those next few hours of just like out of the tent, in the tent, taking turns, digging it out, just, persuading ourselves that we were going to be okay and we were going to get through it. And that might come all the way back around. Like that, I consider that's the Duffel Shuffle too, right? Like the memory isn't the summit so often, and we weren't together on the summit. We summited, or I wasn't there for your summit, I should say. Like it's a night like that where it's just like, two humans, two friends just struggling, and it sucked. But
it sucked.
That's the meat of it.
It sucked, and yet somehow we love it. You know. Isn't that sort of like life? Life can suck at times, but somehow you get through it and you just adore it. The gift is that we get to experience it. That's my biggest reframe sometimes, is like, I have a body that gets to be depressed. I have a mind that gets to function in this very specific way. That is the ultimate reframe. Like everything around you becomes worthy of this insane gratitude if you just take a moment to stop. And I mean, you think about the environment you're in right now, and this is kind of a leap, but it's not. Think about the environment you're in. Think about how many people it took just to build that room, right? And all the things in it. And think about all the technology that came before that to figure out how to build a table the way that we sit. And now the computers, how many minds have gone into every single thing that we're utilizing in this moment to make this connection. That is absolutely mind-boggling. And it's so worthy of gratitude. And yet so often we find ourselves wandering around bitching and moaning about how everything's fucked. Everything is not fucked. In fact, most things are really great most of the time. Even when we're in terrible situations, we're alive and breathing,
I love that. That appreciation, I feel like, or gratitude can be hard to access, hard to hold on to, hard to remember, right? But I think it's
so hard.
it feels
It's
like maybe
so hard, but it's
that's
always
part
worth
of, I
it.
don't know whether that's part of a meditational practice, but it all seems to fit into that, to like try to be able to come back to that when we can.
When we can. And it's not, I mean, it's always accessible, but it's not always an easy reframe, you know, especially
Sure.
because we can't bypass the bullshit of what we're feeling. Just be like, everything's great. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying at any given moment, the world around us is infinitely worthy of gratitude, because there's so much that, you know, that has been created for us to simply exist. And that's really special.
Well, Cory, I'll echo Adrian's sentiment on your book. It was a total page turner. I think I'm quiet on this podcast because I finished it last night and I'm still kind of processing it. A deeply personal story that was really really fascinating to read, and just a great, well-written book. So thank you for bringing that gift into our world.
Yeah. Well, like, you know what? It is yours now. And it doesn't belong to me anymore. And, you know, I wrote it, but it's not mine. And I think that was a big shift that took place, was like, all of a sudden I realized I started writing it for me. And then I realized it wasn't for me anymore. And that was such a relief, because I didn't need to make it about me anymore.
That's
so
cool.
Thank you guys for reading it. I really appreciate it.
It was great. And I actually admittedly listened to the audiobook, and I loved that you narrated the audiobook as well. It added a personal touch that you don't often get on audiobooks. So very cool.
It was fun.
I didn't know you narrated your own audiobook as well. How's your audiobook voice?
You know, it's just this one. I mean, I think people, you know, but I knew where the intonation was. I knew where you know, I knew what I was saying. I couldn't imagine having anybody else read it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but.
Well, we always wrap up our podcast with two questions, Cory. We're bringing it back to adventure. The first one, I'm not sure if you've been prepped for these, but the first one is, you know, the Duffel Shuffle podcast was named as such because, like we've talked about on the podcast, it's in those moments that so much meaning can be and so much partnership. And so, you know, tell us one of your fantastic Duffel Shuffle stories, a memorable moment of shuffling duffels.
I mean, I would say I was thinking there's so many, you know, because you end up taking so much shit on some of these expeditions. But one of my favorite Duffel Shuffle sequences that took basically 40 days was with Emily Harrington and Hillary Nelson, late Hillary Nelson, Renan Ozturk, Taylor Reese, and Mark Jenkins in Myanmar. And it was just this, like, we were just trying to get so much shit, you know, finally, you know, we had to walk 115 miles into the jungle or whatever. And it was just like, how much shit are we going to, like, I don't even know how to describe it. But it took 40 days for us to fail. And I think it took 40 days for us to fail because we had tried to shuffle too many duffels along the way. You know, it's just like, okay, what can we leave here? Well, what can we leave here? Well, what can we leave here? You know?
I feel like you ended up leaving 70% or more of your shit behind over the 40 days.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really good story. You need so much less than you think you do. And I think that's true in relationships and life, in all of it. We bias insignificant bullshit a lot of the times. And when the rubber hits the road, or the boot comes in contact with the trail, really learning what to take and what to leave behind is the lesson there. You know?
Yeah. There may be no better Duffel Shuffle story. So I know there was a short film made of it, I think by Renan and Taylor.
Down to Nothing. Yeah.
Down to Nothing. Look for that. It exemplifies the whole thing. And my personal connection to that story, obviously, is one, Emily and you, Cory, and all the friends I had on that trip, but also the fact that I think I spent those 40 days in Thailand, a place you know very well, but I wasn't, you know, cleansing myself in Thailand. I was like spending every day eating fantastic food, rock climbing, swimming in the sea, like, you know, drinking. And like, so I would get a satellite phone call every 3 or 4 days and just hear this like story of sheer hell and suffering and wondering if you were going to starve to death. And I'd be like, all right, I'm going to go have another beer on the beach now, watch the fire twirlers, and maybe go to a rave. So.
Right.
as
Yeah,
different
it's
as it
true.
could
It's just,
possibly be.
yeah, so different.
I
Wow.
think Emily used the same story for her Duffel Shuffle episode. So truly, it must have been a good one.
It was a good shuffle. It was a
So
good
Cory,
shuffle.
the other question for you is where your next adventure might take you if you have an idea, and what is the first thing you're going to put in your duffel bag?
Oh, the next adventure. Well, Adrian and I might be talking about that later. There's no concrete adventure on the books right now. The big adventure is launching a book and letting it live
Yeah.
and putting it into the world. And a lot of times people go, well, what's next? And my new answer is this. Because, it's like the old Zen, what do you do before enlightenment? Chop wood, carry water. Well, what do you do after enlightenment? Chop wood, carry water,
Heck yeah.
But I think the
Yeah.
first thing that I'll put into my duffel is the bodies that I still need to bury. No.
Just silenced us.
Just silence, right?
I'm like, wait, is that a
Drop.
metaphor? What are we
Yeah, exactly. Everybody's like, wait, what? I'll say
I like
this.
it, but seriously, I mean, you're one of the most traveled humans on the planet. Not only to remote places like Myanmar and Tibet, but also like you have to go and do a speaking gig, or you're on a book tour and you're going from city to city to city. Like, what is that one thing that when you travel you have to have with you?
I mean, I'm trying to think of something, because there's the obvious shit. There's the my journal, my. I don't even take a camera most of the time anymore, which is strange.
All right.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, that would have been my answer in the past. But I think if I would say, this is going to sound sort of like, I get it. I have a favorite pen. And I know that if I have a pen, like something that I like to write with, I'm more enticed to write, and it keeps me connected to my journaling, and it keeps me connected to, and in that there's always a way to express and remember and catalog and keep the things that are worth keeping. And so I don't, it's like this little traveler's companion fountain pen. And I love the way it feels in my hands. I love the sound it makes when it moves across paper. I love the feeling of writing with it. And I never, ever leave home without it. I'll change everything else. The journal will change, the books will change, but, that pen, that can keep me connected. Yeah,
Hell yeah.
that would be it. Yeah.
Fantastic. A pen.
So
The pen.
the pen.
Cory, I want to, really thank you for your openness, for your willingness to join us for this book. Of course, for all our personal experiences, but you know how much I appreciate those. But really, I've enjoyed this conversation and what you brought to us and what you're putting out there before this book, with this book, and after the book. How, if people want to either one, buy the book, which everyone should and will, where would you like to direct them to do that? And number two, anywhere else that the people who want to know more about your story or follow you as you continue moving forward?
The best place, look, if you got a brick and mortar mom and pop bookstore that you love, go there, buy the book there. It should be there. And if they don't have it, just ask them to order it. The best things, honestly, just outside of that, and I don't know if you guys have show notes or whatever, but just Amazon. Yep. It's a great place to buy it. Buy the book, leave a review, only 5 stars. No, I'm just joking. Leave a review.
Same as our podcast, only 5 stars.
Yeah, exactly. just bang those 5 stars. But that really helps. And here's the other thing, and this is something that I always say, is like, if you like the book, buy it for somebody else. That's how writers and that's how art works, is that's how people are supported is it's great to recommend it. It's another thing entirely to take it upon ourselves and go, I'm going to send you this book. That's a big deal. So, and then honestly, like Instagram, that's the other thing. That's where most of this content lives for me, which actually dates me a little bit. I'm on TikTok, I'm on all of it, but Instagram, there's more stuff from the book. There's readings from the book. There's more podcast stuff. And then there's some fun, just beautiful content as well. So, and in there's also in my profile, there's the link tree, and that has links to the audiobook, the hardcover, then the picture book that's coming out. So that's really easy. It's just at Cory Richards, Cory, no E. So those are the best places. Thanks for asking.
Great.
That.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will put all of those in the show notes. This is such great timing. The next generation of podcast host just rolled in to say goodnight. He's in his PJs.
So sweet.
So we're such pros here, just babies rolling through the recording studio in South Africa.
Learned so much. I love it. It's great. It's so cute to see. It's such a different thing, chapters.
It is different. You got to meet this little one. Spend some time with
I know.
him.
I got to come meet him. We live in the same state, bro. It's got to happen.
I know. It's got to happen. Cory, thank you for taking the time and joining us. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you guys so much for having me. Really, really, really thank you. I love seeing you both. I can't wait to see you in person, and we'll fire up an adventure.
We'll talk to you soon, Cory. Thank you. Thanks for listening to episode 8 of the Duffel Shuffle with Cory Richards. His new book, The Color of Everything, is available now, and it's truly a page-turner. Be sure to check it out. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, rate us, and leave us a review. As we near the end of our first season, feedback and support from listeners is what will propel us forward. Episode 9 will come out in a few weeks, so be sure to keep an eye out.